Okay, we're back with part two of our conversation with Ellen Aprill, a professor of law emerita at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. And we were just talking about taxation of private foundation endowments. And now I want to see if we can do a compare contrast with taxation of higher education endowments, which are taxed at starting in 2017. I guess the taxation itself probably started after that, but
It
how
was
much are higher
passed in
education?
the 2017 legislation.
Yeah, and what's the rate for higher education endowments?
For the rate for those 30 or 40 institutions that are subject to the tax is 1.4%. I think trying to get really close to the private foundation, but why not a nice round number
Yeah,
when you're creating it out of whole cloth?
but that was purposeful in your, I mean, they picked essentially the same number.
I do have comparisons for the 2017 legislation. It's really hard to know what was purposeful because
Yeah,
they did things very quickly.
yeah,
And one provision to another is not completely consistent. So,
yeah,
yes, I think so, but I can't give you a lot of evidence of it.
yeah, yeah. Uh, I mean, that is, and it doesn't apply to everybody the way the private foundation number does, by which I mean
Correct.
apply to all private foundations. But and what gave birth, what gave rise to the, I want to characterize it as anger, the reaction against these large higher education endowments and
Yeah, more than $500,000 per student. So, large endowments of universities and colleges have really been the subject of criticism for a long time. Henry Hansman of Yale has a 1990 article that pretty much eviscerates all of the standard arguments in favor of them. What I think happened in 2017, and I talked to some of the people involved in it, was somehow we had a combination of those on the right who distrust elite universities in general and those on the left, is that right? Yeah, those at least not so far right,
yeah,
who were offended by the amount of private equity that these large endowments use and the kind of compensation, enormous compensation that these private equity managers get. And so that combination ended up getting this provision passed.
yeah. So both of those factors, I would say, one could certainly say, still exist, right? Populist anger at big and well-endowed progressive institutions, uh, as well as money managers making a lot of money.
A lot of money, yeah.
Yeah. So are we looking at another or more increases on taxation of endowments in either the higher education or the private foundation context? Or
So
if I were them, I'd be a little worried. No?
I think they are a little bit worried.
Yeah.
The supposed reason for this new tax on endowments of certain universities was the aim of lowering tuition and encouraging low and middle income students. The provision doesn't do that at all. There are all sorts of other ways, if that were your aim, that that provision could work. So whether we're going to have more honest, we just don't like these big endowments.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I think many of us, and I would put myself in this camp, think that there are good reasons to have some tax on large endowments that are not being currently spent across the board. We would have, I and others, have more concern about singling out these university endowments and particularly how they're calculated. Although I did do a fair amount of looking at material on endowments over the university endowments over the years. And there are some very respected studies who say more than $500,000 per student is a good measure of too large an endowment.
Okay. Were you coming, I'm being unfair here. Did I pick up a little whiff of a desire on your part to maybe go after the private foundation endowment? When you said universal, go at
Oh,
endowment.
no, I was not thinking, I mean, they're already taxed. The
Yeah,
level we may, but I'm talking about hospital endowments,
yeah,
religious endowments. I
yeah,
actually finally found some research that gave me numbers on church endowments, which I had never been able to find.
yeah.
And
One would assume, this is a question, higher education endowments are the largest of these. That's a question. Larger
I
than the
think
private
that's
foundation.
probably the case. I'm trying to think if I saw any data on that. I don't think most hospitals have anything coming close.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
if the concern is about accumulating rather than spending, it would be not just the university endowments,
Mm-hmm.
in my view.
In the increase in taxation of higher education endowments was, do I say limited, was applied to only the largest of the higher education institutions really in America. It was tied to the endowment, but those are the big colleges for the most part.
Except it did exclude public universities, and some public universities have very large endowments. Texas has a very large endowment.
Yeah, yeah. Might that make it more likely if one were to make a policy-making attempt to institute higher taxation on private foundation endowments to similarly limit the universe of taxed private foundation endowments to the large ones? Not the case with the current law.
Interesting question. The purpose of most private foundations is to have endowments.
Yeah,
Very few, we are seeing maybe more, a few spending down and getting rid of endowments. Atlantic Philanthropies is the most recent important example. But taxing their endowments sort of taxes their very purpose. University endowments, the rationale has been they're too large for their purpose, which isn't simply accumulating. So I'm not sure the rationale would transfer.
oh, okay. But couldn't one say the purpose of a private foundation is to give money away to charity? Not,
But over perpetuity if they want.
yeah, yeah, okay.
I mean, that's part of the arguments that the universities make as well, that they need to plan for the long horizon. Um, and the numbers do not necessarily hold up. And there's research that shows that maybe it should be the same way for private foundations. If they can't replenish their assets,
Yeah,
maybe we don't want to encourage them.
yeah,
And therefore, a higher tax could be reasonable and better for society. So,
yeah,
yes, you're right. I can either make a distinction between the rationale or say, yes, there are enough similarities, we should treat them in the same way.
yeah, yeah. So to the degree somebody might want to quote unquote rein in big endowment holders uh, in America, for what, if you're a populist conservative who thinks they're all, progressives, or if you're a progressive who thinks it's all pretty comfortable way to live with a lot of money that
Yeah.
is maybe undeserved. Should one be looking to these tax provisions to do that, or are there other maybe better paths towards potential reform to consider?
So we are seeing a lot of philanthropy conducted not through private foundations these days. We all know about the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, the Omniar Network, many of them. And maybe that shows that's not where we should be looking. On the other hand, most of these people are pretty young.
Yeah,
Many of them have private foundations among their network. And it could be they will turn to private foundations as they grow older, as their families grow older. That's a little bit of an unknown. So we at least have to think of other vehicles besides private foundations when we look at these issues. Look, I'm not going to pronounce it right. I think it's Said, the billionaire who
very
did the
side.
think
Yeah,
for Yeah, I keep looking up how to pronounce his name.
Yeah, yeah,
And the same with the Patagonia owner. They went straight to C4, 501c4 social welfare organization.
yeah,
So we can't narrow our focus only to private foundation, given what the very rich are doing these days.
yeah. I mean, at least they're being honest though then, right? I mean, to go to a C4 that can do politics
Absolutely.
is different from using a C3 for politics. I guess I'm implying that's done a lot, and I am. I am.
There
Yeah,
are a lot of things on the edge that you could argue should go over the edge.
yeah,
That
yeah,
currently would. Yes, they're being honest. They're not taking an income tax deduction. But the truth of the matter is, for the super wealthy, they don't care about the
yeah.
income tax deduction.
Uh, the new book, For Profit Philanthropy, calls the 1969 law the grand bargain. You are noting here essentially that newer, younger philanthropy is refusing to make that bargain knowingly
But
and purposely.
right, but I would consider it only a pretty good bargain.
Oh, okay, but the bargain
Because
not.
501c4s
Yeah,
existed at the time. They
yeah,
were an available option at the time. There, I just checked the regulations allowing politicking, so long as isn't the primary purpose, date back to 59, so 10 years before the grand bargain. The revenue ruling that says C4s can lobby without limit is from 1970, shortly after the grand bargain.
yeah,
So there were assumptions about, and the income tax rate was much higher at the time.
yeah,
And so a
yeah,
lot of pressures have changed since then.
yeah,
And we need to think more broadly about what we want from philanthropy, spelled broadly, and not just charity.
yeah. Okay. Was there anything I didn't ask? I mean,
Well, I do think we pay a lot of attention to the income tax deduction, which doesn't necessarily motivate. There are a couple other things we need to think about. Both these two recent C4 donations, no income tax deduction, but enormous savings because there was no tax on the built-in gain on the stock. And if you have a political organization, a 527 organization, you don't care about numbers, there's a deemed sale when you donate appreciated assets to 527.
mhm.
I think there's a good argument we should do the same for C4s. Personally, I'd like to do it to C3s too, that the art museums would come and find out where I live and go after me.
Yeah, yeah,
And the other aspect we need to think hard about is the estate tax. Because even if you don't care about income tax deductions, the super wealthy care about the estate tax. And the estate tax has an unlimited deduction, unlike income tax, even if it captures you. And so that's important as well. People who give money to C4s and then maintain control have to do some fancy footwork to make sure it's not included in their estate.
mhm,
But we need to think about all the taxes and not just the income tax.
mhm. You must be working on another law review article or set of them or books, or what's on your to-do list now in retirement? Other
So
than,
my most immediate project that I need to finish up is I did a paper for the National Conference of Philanthropy and Law of NYU on some recent administrative law developments involving tax and calling all sorts of things in violation of the Administrative Procedure Act.
uh,
And I walked through what would happen if they started applying this to our 501c3 statute and regs from the 1950s.
yeah,
So that in part shows us where we maybe need to change our current rules on C3s, but it also shows us some of the consequences if these courts continue to apply doctrines that developed only recently to regulations from decades and decades ago. So it's sort of fun.
yeah, that's great. Okay, well, we will look forward to reading that, and hope you are going to be looking increasingly forward to your total free time in retirement.
Yeah, total free time.
If and
Thank
when
you
you
so
ever.
much. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. I totally appreciate it.